In 1982, on a dark California highway, a patrolman knelt beside a dead young woman and radioed it in as a suicide. He was the last person to lie about her that night because he was the one who killed her. He wore the badge. He had been Officer of the Year. An entire town trusted him with their children, and twice a jury would let him walk out the courthouse door a free man. So, how does a man trained to catch killers become one and hide it in plain sight? The answer took years, 2 states, and the full weight of the FBI to drag into the light. Think about how much we hand over to a uniform without a second thought. A badge asks, and we obey. That quiet agreement holds society together, and we barely notice it exists. But every trust can be turned into a weapon. George Gwaltney knew exactly how much power his uniform carried, and he learned to use it against the very people it was meant to protect. Jim Kallstrom, who ran the FBI's New York office, put it plainly. When a good cop goes bad, every tool of law enforcement is turned toward repairing the damage. This case would test all of them. Because Gwaltney was no ordinary suspect. He had spent a decade solving crimes. He understood evidence, procedure, and every mistake a killer usually makes. That knowledge made him a cunning adversary. Her name was Robin Bishop, 23 years old, full of plans, chasing a dream that had pulled her all the way from Las Vegas toward the lights of Los Angeles. She wanted to act. A friend in LA had told her the truth every dreamer eventually hears. If you're serious, you have to be here. So Robin decided she would move. That January, she drove back to Vegas to pack up her whole life. She was excited, restless, certain that everything good was finally about to start. The night of January 11th, 1982, she stopped in Barstow, California. A quick call home to her mother, a sandwich, small, ordinary things. Then she walked back to her car. She didn't know she was being watched. Across the lot, a highway patrolman had already fixed his eyes on her. His name was George Gwaltney, and he had done this before. Behind the respected officer and pillar of the community hid a private habit. He pulled women over for speeding, then offered them a trade, their bodies for a torn-up ticket. He memorized the make and model of her car in seconds and clocked the Nevada plate. Everything he needed filed away before she had even started her engine. Then they spotted his opening. A neighborhood boy he recognized was heading home on foot. Gwaltney waved him over and, greeting him by name, offered him a lift, a small kindness, and a convenient alibi all at once. This was the man everyone loved. A former Officer of the Year the cop parents trusted to watch over their kids. He drove Preston Olson home and even waved hello to his parents. By the time he pulled away from Preston's door, Robin was already miles gone, rolling east toward Nevada on Interstate 15, but Gwaltney knew exactly where she was heading. The highway that night was strangely empty. No steady stream of headlights, no witnesses. Just open desert and dark. He caught up with her east of Barstow and hit his lights and siren. Robin had every reason to be nervous. She had a history of speeding tickets, a year of probation just behind her, and a warning that one more could cost her her license. For an actress with no car and no license in a city like Los Angeles, that stop meant everything. She would do whatever it took to keep her dream alive. Gwaltney was counting on it. His request for her license came easy, nothing out of the ordinary. Then he instructed her to get out and walk with him back to his patrol car. The keys stayed hanging in the ignition, her purse resting where she had left it on the seat. She must have been confused when the handcuffs snapped shut. She had done nothing but speed. Yet he stood her against the car, cuffed her, and put her in his back seat. Questions must have raced through her mind. Why the cuffs? Where was he taking her? She didn't even know his name. Meanwhile, he walked back and grabbed her purse. As he did, a single car passed by with one driver at the wheel. A small, ordinary moment. It would matter far more than anyone could have guessed. He took the purse, climbed into his cruiser, and drove off, leaving her car abandoned on the interstate shoulder. Then he steered toward a place he knew well. An exit led to a seldom-used access road running beside the highway. It was his private spot, a hidden lookout where he could watch traffic pass some 400 feet away from every direction. Cornered by the fear of arrest and a revoked license, Robin Bishop was raped by George Gwaltney in that lonely spot. What he had come for, he took. Then, cold and methodical, he radioed in her car as simply abandoned. License 571 FBD. It was the first entry in a long ledger of lies, each one meant to protect him. He drove her back along the road until her car sat within walking distance. Unlocking the handcuffs, he set her loose. In his own mind, the matter was finished. Whatever he had promised, he meant to honor. Yet as she leaned down to pull on her boots, some internal balance tipped. Maybe her fear hardened into fury. Maybe she told him she would go to the authorities. And there was a reason that threat had teeth. One of Nevada's prosecutors was a member of her own family. It would be her word against his, and he liked those odds. Until a passing deputy sheriff's spotlight swept across the access road and caught him standing right there beside his car. All at once, her warnings carried real weight. Had someone recognized him, what excuse could he possibly give for sitting out here beside her? Seized by that sudden dread, Gwaltney concluded that Robin could never be allowed to talk. He took the one step that could never be undone, a single shot to the back of her head. Now there was no distance left between him and the dead girl at his feet. Desperate, he fell back on the only routine he knew. Over the radio, he told dispatch that a body had turned up, maybe a suicide. All it bought him was a handful of minutes before backup would roll in. So he did what no honest officer ever would. He clawed beneath her head, hunting for the bullet, that single scrap of metal that could undo him. Yet nothing had passed through her skull. The round was still lodged inside. Nothing could be reversed now. Into that tainted scene stepped Milt Rose, a homicide detective with the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department, dispatched to look into the body Gwaltney claimed he had come across. On his way, dispatch asked Rose to look at the abandoned car nearby. The body lay only a short distance off, in plain view. Investigators sensed the two were connected before they even arrived. The car told its own strange story. No breakdown, no bad tires, no mechanical fault at all. It was still in gear, and the keys sat inside. So why had it simply stopped where it did? At the scene, Gwaltney had regained his composure. Calm and professional, he explained how he found her, checked for a pulse, searched her purse. The Nevada registration named her Robin Bishop. But Detective Rose refused to accept the suicide story. A shot had struck the back of her head from close in, and her body had been shifted slightly once she was down. 4 inches off, a trail of blood stained the ground. This was murder. Recent rain had softened the sand, and it held everything. Tire tracks and footprints, sharp and clear, and they belonged to Gwaltney and his cruiser, scattered all over the scene. Rose would later trace those tracks himself, step by step across the sand, right up to where Robin Bishop's body was found. Then came the wrists, 2 thin marks across the top, one across the bottom. Any officer recognizes those instantly. They were the marks left by handcuffs. The purse deepened the mystery. Nothing stolen, no sign of robbery, but her registration and license lay right on top, as if shown to someone and hurriedly stuffed back in. Everything pointed one uncomfortable direction: handcuffs, an inspected license, no robbery. To Rose, it whispered a traffic stop, someone in a position of authority, a police officer, or someone playing one. Here lay the trap. Nearly every investigator at that scene was Gwaltney's friend or colleague. The idea that he could be the killer wasn't just unthinkable, it wasn't even on the table. The autopsy filled in the rest. Her body had been moved after death, and the bruises came from a human hand. She had had sex within 24 hours, yet no signs of a forced assault. Investigators began the only logical way, by clearing everyone who had been near that road. Officers, deputies, anyone in the area. And they had to start with the man who found the body, Gwaltney himself. But Gwaltney was already ahead of them. That very night, after his shift, he wrestled the barrel off his service revolver. That barrel could stamp a bullet with his gun's unique signature. The next morning, he walked into a local gun shop to order a replacement barrel, one that would scramble any ballistics test. But it wasn't in stock. It had to be ordered. His clock was running. The scrubbing went on. He sent his uniform off to be cleaned. His holster he handed over to be re-dyed and re-stitched, so any speck of blood or tissue from the weapon quietly vanished. All that was left to do was buy time. At the morning briefing, Rose asked every officer to hand over anything relevant. When they came for Gwaltney's service revolver, he produced the wrong gun, his off-duty weapon instead. Ordered back to fetch the correct one, he returned with nothing but a prepared explanation. He said it would sound unbelievable, but the gun had been taken. A break-in, he insisted. The weapon had simply disappeared. It sounded thin, but Gwaltney was a highway patrolman, and that carried weight. Detective Brian English admitted he was inclined to believe him. His locker was combed for the vanished gun. Nothing turned up. Yet as they questioned him, one detail kept nagging at the detectives. His weapon was gone, and he seemed utterly unbothered by it. Any innocent officer would have been frantic over a stolen firearm. Gwaltney was calm. That indifference told the detectives more than any answer could. Almost 2 days in, they read him his rights. He now stood as the prime suspect, though there was nowhere near enough to hold him. Maintaining his innocence, Gwaltney offered to sit down for a recorded interview and take them through that night. His account was tidy. Dinner break, then picking up young Preston Olson, home by 8:50, back on the interstate. Around 9:15, he found the abandoned car, then turned onto the access road and saw a pale shape. What struck the detectives was how he behaved, not like a man accused of murder. Any of them, in his shoes, would have been furious, demanding proof. Gwaltney just kept talking, calm as ever. He even demanded a lie detector test and passed it. He looked the examiner in the eye and said he had not killed Robin Bishop, and the machine found no deception. Another hurdle cleared. Then Gwaltney gave consent to search his house, betting on his own confidence. Deputies checked his burglary claim first. No forced entry, no broken window, nothing to support the story. Then, when daylight arrived, they got his truck open. Inside sat the frame of a Smith & Wesson Model 19, A357 Magnum revolver, battered and streaked with tool marks, taken apart by someone who barely understood the task. Gone was the barrel, the single component that could be matched to a bullet. Registration on the frame traced back to George Michael Gwaltney. The detectives saw it as gutted for one purpose alone. They placed him under arrest. Still, all of it remained circumstantial. So the search resumed. Out behind the garage, a set of gripping tools and a pipe vise carried fresh streaks of transferred metal. Inside a closet sat boxes of ammunition stamped with the CHP insignia. Tucked in among the ordinary rounds were 27 of a different kind. Remington soft points, 357 caliber, and 158 grain. Precisely the sort of round that had ended Robin Bishop's life. His wife was shattered and adamant. George had been the same as always, a wonderful husband, a caring father, nothing strange, nothing off. She could not fit the man she loved into the accusation. Barstow reeled. His fellow officers had known and admired him for decades, and even with the evidence stacking up, they couldn't accept it. Some broke down in tears during their own interviews. Yet the findings refused to stop mounting. Traces of semen surfaced in the rear seat of his cruiser and on Robin's jeans. Then a deputy by the name of Roger Kaufman turned in a report that shifted everything. Kaufman had driven past that exact spot near the time of the murder. From the interstate, he saw parking lights on the little access road, shined his spotlight, and glimpsed an officer standing beside a car. Only minutes on, he caught Gwaltney over the radio calling in a possible suicide, his voice unsteady. That struck him as strange. Gwaltney never came undone. He let it slip from his mind, right up until word of the arrest reached him. The pattern was undeniable. Gwaltney had used his own training against the investigation. Cleaned uniform, re-dyed holster, footprints trampling the scene. He had thought of everything a detective would look for. After months of internal review, the California Highway Patrol fired him. Yet the detectives, now certain of his guilt, still could not prove he was lying. His wife and friends stood firmly behind him. When the trial finally opened 9 months afterward, prosecutor Betty Kennedy assumed that the mountain of evidence, even if it was only circumstantial, would deliver a quick guilty verdict. What she underestimated was the strength of the defense. Defense attorney George Porter had a bold story of his own. His client, he told the jury, was framed perhaps by someone inside his own department. Someone else stopped Robin Bishop that night. Porter's key witness was railroad worker Dennis Gubler, who swore he passed Robin's empty car that night. 50 feet behind it sat a light-colored car and a man with a flashlight walking toward hers. The description he offered fit someone other than Gwaltney, which was exactly his aim. There were other possible culprits. Porter urged the jury to weigh. Doubt was the only thing he needed, and he was seeding it with care. The prosecution laid out an exact sequence of events, running from Robin's final call to her mother in Barstow to the moment Gwaltney radioed in the body. Driving times, the Olsen pickup, the deputy's sighting all lined up. They believed it could not be broken. But Porter turned the timeline into a weapon. Barely 20 minutes, he argued. Could one man really do all of that in so little time? And he paraded dozens of colleagues who swore to Gwaltney's character. The science was shakier than anyone hoped. DNA evidence was still 6 years in the future, so the semen samples proved little. The tool mark analysis of the gun frame stayed frustratingly inconclusive. The prosecution leaned on the gun frame. Why was it in his truck? Why torn apart? Why the missing barrel, the missing cylinder, the grips, the hammer, the trigger, all gone? Surely the jury would ask. Then Gwaltney took the stand, and he was flawless. Polished, prepared, an answer for every question. He didn't need to disprove anything. He only had to drip a little doubt onto each piece of evidence. In the end, 50 witnesses drawn from 30 areas of expertise proved not enough. 4 days in, the jury could not agree, splitting 8-4 toward acquittal. George Gwaltney walked out a free man. Jurors admitted afterward what really happened in that room. Several believed he might well have done it, but they couldn't bring themselves to convict. He was a highway patrolman, respected, a good man. The prosecutors would not give up. In under a year, they brought him before a superior court once more. Yet with almost nothing fresh to offer, that jury hung as well, 7-5, leaning toward acquittal. A third attempt was refused by a judge who viewed it as harassment. Around Barstow, it looked as though the law would never lay a hand on George Gwaltney. Still, the prosecutors held on to their conviction without a flicker of doubt. From the very first arrest, the FBI had been watching. Any homicide involving a police officer draws their eye. After a second acquittal and mounting public outrage, the Los Angeles field office decided to step in. California could never try him for murder again. But there was another door. In federal court, killing Robin Bishop while on duty meant Gwaltney had violated her civil rights, a crime that had never been argued this way. Responsibility for the case fell to Special Agent Michael Randolph. In his eyes, Gwaltney was a predator turned loose among the flock. The locals had never grasped the kind of man before them, and so he stayed a move ahead, wiping out evidence along the way. Randolph pored over every crime scene photograph until one stopped him cold. It showed the open trunk of Gwaltney's patrol car that night, and inside it, a small box of ammunition. He sent the photo to the FBI lab for enlargement. The verdict came back damning. It was a box of .357 Magnum ammunition, the illegal kind Gwaltney had sworn under oath he never carried that night. It was almost certainly the very box later recovered from his house. With that, Randolph had trapped George Gwaltney in his first falsehood, a man who would lie about that through 2 trials. What else might he have lied about? So the FBI tore the whole case down to the bolts. Randolph called it a TWA Flight 800 approach. Every rivet examined, every rock turned. Reports, transcripts, photos, physical evidence, all of it, again. The gun frame traveled to the Firearms and Tool Mark Unit in Washington, a lab unlike any other. Over 2,000 guns, from Dillinger's pistol to modern assault rifles, and every bullet made in 50 years. Agent Jim Cadigan took the frame and 15 tools seized from Gwaltney's home, including that pipe vise. Steel almost always leaves a mark when it works, a signature as unique as a fingerprint. Near the pinhole that locks the barrel, Cadigan found a tiny impression, a 1/16 of an inch, and a screwdriver mark below it. Then, on one of the tools, a pipe wrench with a single broken tooth. Working from that chipped tooth as his reference, he took impression after impression and studied each under the microscope. His finding allowed for no alternative. One tool alone, and nothing else, had left the marks on the frame. But the missing barrel still blocked any ballistics test, the same wall that had beaten the state. So the FBI reached for something never used in forensics before, a radical application of nuclear technology. The idea itself was simple enough. Whenever a producer like Remington mixes up a batch of lead, the components get combined roughly the way a cook flings ingredients into a meatloaf. From batch to batch, the chemistry never matches. Each pour of lead, then, bore its own signature. The lab took over 200 rounds collected from Gwaltney, made them radioactive, and read their chemical weight, and there it was. Roughly 27 rounds matched the lead pulled from the victim's head. The test was indisputable. Each of the 27 bullets in his closet, bullets he had sworn under oath he did not own, came from the same batch of lead as the round that killed Robin Bishop. Randolph went further, building psychological portraits of both killer and victim. The federal jury had to see Robin as exactly what she was, a genuine, trusting victim, not a statistic. It explained the quiet horror of the scene. She had been raped by someone she was raised to trust, an officer of the law. She pulled over, opened her wallet, stepped out, let herself be cuffed. She was easy prey. Then they dug into his history, and the pattern was ugly. A woman admitted an affair with him, meeting at his regular isolated pull-off, the very same exit where he took Robin Bishop. They tracked down every woman he had ticketed in 2 years. Nearly a dozen said he had solicited them for sex or touched them suggestively. When the uniform went on, the FBI concluded he turned predator. The old testimony got a second reading, hunting for cracks, and in a small town where everyone knows everyone, witnesses were scared. The FBI made one thing clear: they were not blowing away with the desert wind. That pressure cracked the case wide. One gun shop owner, William Addington of the Powderhorn Gun Shop, had told both state trials that Gwaltney never came in. Then the FBI pulled his phone records. The toll records exposed him. The afternoon after the murder, right after the briefing Gwaltney attended, Addington had phoned a Sacramento shop, trying to order a barrel for exactly Gwaltney's missing weapon. Confronted, Addington broke. He admitted Gwaltney had been in his store the day after the murder, trying to buy a barrel. He had lied to state investigators to stay out of it. Lying to the FBI, he feared, was a felony. It got worse for Gwaltney. He had built a false alibi to hide those errands, the gun shop and the shoe repair where he cleaned his holster, claiming to be on duty. His careful story was unraveling thread by thread. But the largest loose end was the boy. No one had ever really sat down with Preston Olson. Twice he had taken the stand and backed Gwaltney's account of the timing. And yet Preston had never owned a watch, nor once glanced at a clock. Walking through it minute by minute with Preston and his mother, the FBI found it. Gwaltney had left the boy's house a full half hour earlier than he had testified. 30 missing minutes he could never explain. And his own testimony boxed him in. Across 2 trials, he had committed himself to that sequence of times. There was no rewriting it now. Set against the corrected clock, he was left holding 20 to 40 unexplained minutes with no answer for them. That gap was all he needed to stop Robin, cuff her, force her into that bargain, and pull the trigger. A young blonde with out-of-state plates. He zipped up the road, waited a beat, and gave chase. One puzzle remained: the semen samples from the first 2 trials. Before DNA, they were nearly useless, but Gwaltney had a rare quirk in his history. He'd had a vasectomy, then had it reversed. The prosecution went to Dr. Edward Blake at Forensic Science Associates. Science keeps advancing, he reasoned, and from fertility specialists he learned that reversing a vasectomy can prompt the body to produce anti-sperm antibodies. The body treats leaked sperm like invading germs and produces the antibodies. It's rare, and it could act like a marker in seminal fluid. Blake sent Gwaltney samples to a University of California lab. The results were striking. His fluids didn't just contain the antibodies, they carried them at very high levels. That was the incentive to test the crime scene evidence itself. Blake used a new fertility test, the immunobead assay, which could spot those antibodies in the samples. Because no court had ever seen this, he filmed the whole thing to show the federal jury exactly what happened. Extracts from Robin's jeans and from the patrol car seat were tested. Both came back positive for the anti-sperm antibodies. The invisible thread now tied Gwaltney directly to her body and his own back seat. 6 months of relentless work led the agents to a single certainty. They had the right man, and this time they meant to keep him. Charged by a federal grand jury with stripping Robin Bishop of her civil rights, George Michael Gwaltney became the first law enforcement officer in California to be prosecuted under that federal provision. Just as before, he told the court he was innocent. For the first time since it all began, Robin's parents let themselves hope. Now Gwaltney wasn't facing a hometown jury. He was facing a federal court and the full machinery of the FBI. Federal proceedings began on January 17, 1984, in the U.S. District Court at Los Angeles. Public defender Carol Douglas committed to one telling choice. This time around, the defendant would never take the stand. One by one, the FBI punched holes in every pillar of his old defense. They told the jury he had marked Robin as prey the moment he saw her in that fast food restaurant. His Officer of the Year image fell apart. The revised timeline gave him all the time he needed. He drove to his familiar hidden spot and forced the bargain, confirmed by the semen stain on the seat of his own new patrol car. Then, as she struggled with her boots, the beam of Deputy Kaufman's spotlight caught him out on the access road at some distance from her vehicle. Unsure who had seen him or exactly what they had taken in, his composure broke and he shot Robin Bishop dead. His suicide call collapsed under the science. The autopsy and photos proved he never moved her head to check a pulse. He had moved it too far, digging for the bullet that could hang him. And the barrel he had wrenched off in a hurry left the very tool marks that tied his gun frame to his own pipe wrench. Every act of concealment had become a piece of the case against him. But nothing hit harder than the immunobead videotape. On screen, tiny beads latched onto living sperm, swimming through the medium. The antibodies were there, in both Robin's jeans and the patrol car seat. The judge permitted Dr. Blake to speak only in percentages, but even those figures pressed down hard. His blood type narrowed Gwaltney to 12% of the population. Within that group, a mere 5% carried the antibodies. The arithmetic left barely any way out. Fewer than 1 in 100 people could have been Robin Bishop's partner that night. Call it circumstantial all you wished. The science bore down with crushing weight. The verdict came fast. When the jurors filed in, not one of them would look at George Gwaltney. Everyone in the room already knew. Guilty. The judge handed down the harshest sentence he could. "You have betrayed your badge," he told him. 90 years in federal prison, with 30 to serve before any hope of parole. A heart attack took George Gwaltney's life behind bars 12 years afterward. He insisted to his final breath that he was innocent, a man set up. But the badge he had sheltered behind was stripped from him for good.